They told you this was a kidnapping. $6 million in Bitcoin by February 9th. Ransom notes, not one but two, sent to news outlets across the country. TMZ, local Arizona television stations, major national networks. Every outlet received the same story. A $6 million demand, a hard deadline, a threat against an elderly woman's life. And the notes were written well. The grammar was, as TMZ founder Harvey Levin described it publicly, perfect, structured, and layered, detailed in ways that seemed to prove they were written by someone who was actually there, someone who knew about the Apple Watch, someone who knew about the floodlight at the front of the home. And for 60 days, the entire country believed it. Law enforcement appeared to believe it. The FBI set up a forward command post in Tucson. Sheriff Chris Nanos held press conference after press conference telling the public he was confident Nancy had been abducted, that he personally believed she was still alive, that his investigators were making progress. Search and rescue teams swept the Sonoran Desert. Volunteer groups drove in from neighboring states. A Mexican missing persons organization, Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, women who have spent years finding bodies in desert terrain that official agencies missed, traveled across the border specifically to help. A $1 million reward was announced, then raised, then made payable anonymously in cash to lower the barrier for anyone who knew something but was afraid to come forward. Every lead went cold. Both deadlines passed. No exchange, no response, no escalation, no third demand, no follow-up, no contact of any kind from whoever claimed to be holding Nancy Guthrie. And then, not in a court document, not in an FBI press release, not in any official statement, but quietly, in the middle of a cable news interview, a man who spent his career inside the highest levels of American law enforcement said something that should have reframed this entire investigation from that moment forward. He said whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. He wasn't describing the investigation. He was describing what happened at Nancy Guthrie's front door in the earliest hours of February 1st, 2026. And if he is right, and the evidence, piece by piece, point by point, suggests he is, then the story that has been told about this case since the beginning does not fit what actually happened. The ransom notes were not a genuine demand for payment. They were something else. And what they were designed to cover is what multiple credentialed experts have been building toward in careful, measured professional language for 2 months. Tonight we examine 5 specific pieces of evidence. Each one, standing alone, raises a serious question about the kidnapping narrative. Together, they build toward a conclusion that several of the most experienced law enforcement analysts following this case have already reached. A conclusion that changes every question being asked about where Nancy Guthrie is and what actually happened to her. This analysis is built entirely on confirmed facts, documented expert statements, and on-the-record assessments from named credentialed professionals. Nothing speculative, nothing from anonymous sources. The evidence itself and what it shows. Before we go further, if you believe that cases like this one deserve serious evidence-based analysis that follows the forensic record wherever it leads, that asks the difficult questions the evidence itself is generating, and that never sensationalizes real tragedy, subscribe to Unclosed Files right now and hit the notification bell. We cover the cases that demand answers. New investigations every single week. If this case is consuming your attention, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, which piece of evidence do you think most directly challenges the kidnapping theory? Leave your analysis below. I read every one. Now, before any evidence analysis, there is a woman at the center of this case who deserves more than a theory and a case number. Nancy Guthrie had lived in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona for more than 50 years. She raised 3 children in that desert community after her husband Charles died at 49 during a mining trip in Mexico in 1988. She widowed young and built a life anyway. She watched her children build lives. She became a grandmother. She was deeply connected to her church community at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Tucson, where her name has been spoken in prayer every Sunday since she disappeared. Sheriff Nanos described her publicly with consistent specificity, sharp as a tack, cognitively fully present, a woman who understood everything happening around her. She had significant physical limitations. She relied on daily medication for a serious heart condition. She had a pacemaker syncing to her phone via Bluetooth. She could not walk 50 yards unassisted. She wore hearing aids, and when she removed them at night to sleep, the world around her went completely silent. On the evening of January 31, 2026, she had dinner and a card game at her daughter Annie's home. Her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni drove her home and waited until she was safely inside. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. That is the last confirmed normal moment. That door closing in the digital record is the boundary between what is known and what 60 days of investigation is still working to establish. Now let's establish exactly what the evidence shows. Let us also establish what the investigation looked like from the outside during those 60 days. Because the gap between the official narrative and the expert analysis has been visible in the public record for weeks. It simply has not been stated directly. From February 1st through the first deadline of February 9th, the entire architecture of the national coverage operated within the kidnapping frame. Every expert appearance on cable news, every sheriff's press conference, every FBI statement treated the ransom demand as the operational center of the case. Where is Nancy? Who has her? When will they make contact? How do we get her back? Those were the questions being asked. Those were the questions being analyzed. But running parallel to that coverage, documented in the same media outlets, sometimes in the same segments, was a consistent stream of professional assessments that did not fit the frame. CNN's John Miller flagging the one-way communication problem. The FBI's own lead agent noting the absence of follow-up contact was unusual. Former FBI agents describing the notes as disconnected from any known pattern of professional ransom operations. Forensic experts analyzing the blood evidence and the 41-minute window in ways that generated conclusions incompatible with a clean kidnapping extraction. A retired police lieutenant publicly estimating that Nancy's medical situation would not have allowed her to survive beyond 72 hours without intervention. Those assessments were documented. They were on the record. They were delivered by named professionals with specific credentialed backgrounds. And they were not contradicted by the physical evidence. They were supported by it. The gap between those professional assessments and the dominant narrative is what this video is about. Not to sensationalize, not to speculate, but because in a case where the evidence itself has been generating a consistent picture for 60 days, and that picture has not been clearly stated in the public coverage, stating it clearly is what this case demands. The first piece of evidence, the ransom notes and what they actually are. Multiple ransom notes arrived in the days following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. They demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. They set a deadline of February 9th, 8 days after she was reported missing. They referenced specific details, including Nancy's Apple Watch and a floodlight at her home, that suggested knowledge of the scene. They were, as Levin described, grammatically coherent, structured, and layered. These characteristics led the FBI to take them seriously. Heath Janke, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Phoenix division, confirmed publicly that the Bureau was treating the notes as requiring serious investigation. And then stop. Because everything else about those notes is wrong, and the wrongness is not subtle. Think about what a ransom demand actually is at its operational core. It is a negotiation instrument. It is a communication designed to initiate a transaction. You hold something of value. You contact the people with the resources to get it back. You state your price. You open a channel for response. You wait. You negotiate. That is the architecture of ransom communications, from the Lindbergh kidnapping through modern organized crime operations through corporate hostage situations overseas. The communication goes to the people with the money, always, without exception. Because without contact with those people, there is no leverage. Without leverage, there is no transaction. Without a transaction, there is no point to what was done. These notes went to TMZ and to local Arizona television newsrooms. That is not a private negotiation. That is a press release. A document designed not to initiate a two-way financial discussion, but to create a specific, very public story. CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller, a former Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism at the NYPD, one of the most decorated law enforcement careers in American history, addressed this directly on CNN. He described the ransom notes as a one-way conversation, a demand sent to media outlets from what appeared to be untraceable email addresses. with a Bitcoin wallet where money could theoretically be deposited, but no phone number, no email address, no mechanism of any kind for the Guthrie family to respond, make contact, request proof of life, or initiate the negotiation that the alleged demand required. Janka confirmed this himself. He stated publicly, carefully but clearly, that there had been no contact at all with the Guthrie family since the messages were sent to media, and he noted that this was unusual in kidnapping cases, that there would normally be contact by this point. The FBI's lead agent in this case publicly flagged that the core mechanic of the kidnapping theory, the ransom communication, was not behaving like a real ransom communication. Former FBI Special Agent Johnny Grusing, who spent 25 years working exactly these kinds of cases, analyzed the notes and reached the same conclusion. He said the kidnap for ransom theory does not add up because the alleged kidnappers never reached out to the Guthrie family directly. From his professional experience, when criminals take someone for money, they contact the family. Urgency, rapid back and forth, proof of life demands and assertions of control. That contact begins within hours. It goes to the family, not to a cable news network. Morgan Wright, CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, was more direct. He dismissed the TMZ notes as fake on the record during an interview with journalist Brian Enton. His reasoning: there was never a real way to make contact, never a real mechanism to send real money. The Bitcoin wallet referenced in the notes never recorded a single transaction. Not before either deadline, not after, not at any point. The FBI reportedly sent a small test amount to the wallet as a digital trap, monitoring it for any access event that would reveal the accessor's IP address and device. Nobody touched it, not even to check the balance. A professional criminal enterprise that had successfully taken an elderly woman from her home would move a ransom payment immediately upon receipt, using established cryptocurrency laundering techniques. The silence of that wallet, the complete absence of any interaction with it by anyone claiming to hold Nancy Guthrie, is not the behavior of people waiting to be paid. It is the behavior of people who had no use for the wallet in the first place. The ransom notes passed 2 deadlines and then went silent. Completely, permanently silent. There is one more dimension of the ransom note analysis that deserves specific attention, because it was documented by an expert whose professional background is directly relevant to assessing exactly these communications. The notes that arrived, the ones Savannah described as the 2 she believed were real, the ones that contained the Apple Watch detail and the floodlight reference, those notes were sent to media organizations using what appeared to be cloaking software to hide the sender's identity. The second note arrived at a local television station from a different IP address than the first, but both appeared to use similar anonymization tools. This is technically sophisticated behavior. Using cloaking software to hide email origin requires specific knowledge and deliberate effort. It is not something an impulsive actor does. It requires planning. And yet, the same notes provided no mechanism for contact, no phone number, no callback, no response channel. Sophisticated enough to hide the sender's digital identity, but not sophisticated enough to include a basic communication mechanism for the negotiation those notes were supposedly initiating. That combination, technical sophistication in hiding identity, complete absence of any contact mechanism, does not make sense in the context of a genuine ransom demand. It makes sense in the context of someone who needed to create a public story about a kidnapping while ensuring they could never be drawn into an actual negotiation that would require producing a living person. Dr. Lori Petler, a forensic and behavioral psychologist who analyzed this case publicly, addressed the survival question directly. She explained that people who are interested in money are interested in survival because they need the person alive to create a scenario where they can ask for money and get the person back. Her conclusion: she was not sure whoever was involved was interested in Nancy's survival. That assessment, from a forensic psychologist analyzing the behavioral profile of this crime, cuts to the heart of the problem with the kidnapping narrative. A genuine ransom kidnapping is economically dependent on the victim's survival. The behavior documented in this case is not consistent with that economic dependency. The second piece of evidence: the complete absence of proof of life. On February 4, 2026, 3 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera with her siblings and said, in the composed language of someone who has nothing left but composure, the following: We live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive and that you have her. Read that carefully. This is a nationally recognized NBC anchor. She has been briefed directly and continuously by the FBI agents running this investigation. She has access to the highest levels of law enforcement resources in the country. And 3 days into this case, she is publicly saying on camera that she does not know whether her mother is alive. Not because no one has told her. Because no one has shown her. Because whoever allegedly had Nancy Guthrie had not provided any evidence of it. 2 ransom notes, a $6 million demand, an 8-day deadline, and across the entire duration of that supposed kidnapping in progress, not one proof of life, not a phone call, not a recorded message, not a photograph, not a video, not a third-party communication, not a handwritten note referencing something only Nancy would know, not a single piece of information that the family could verify, that a hostage negotiator could authenticate. That would take 30 seconds to produce if you actually had the person you claim to have. In any legitimate ransom kidnapping, proof of life is not a courtesy. It is the operational foundation. Without it, the leverage disappears. The family cannot in good faith negotiate for someone they cannot confirm is alive. No financial institution, no cryptocurrency transfer mechanism, no payment infrastructure would operate without some verification that the transaction has a legitimate purpose. Proof of life is not an extra step. It is the prerequisite for every step that follows. Former FBI agent Guthrie identified something additional when analyzing the ransom communications in detail. The person or persons who sent the emails to media outlets appeared to be a separate operation from the individual seen on the doorbell camera footage. The lone masked figure at Nancy's front door and the person or persons who drafted the notes and sent them to newsrooms did not appear to be the same operational entity working in coordination. The notes had no mechanism for response, no way for Savannah to contact anyone, no channel for anything that would look like an actual kidnapping negotiation. Which raises the question of whether the note writers had any actual connection to what happened that night, or whether they were constructing a cover story around events they knew about but did not execute. There is also the question of forced entry that has never been publicly resolved, and its absence from the confirmed record is itself forensically significant. For weeks into this investigation, law enforcement declined to confirm whether there had been forced entry at Nancy's residence. Sheriff Nanos and his department consistently declined to answer directly whether any doors, windows, or locks had been compromised. A criminal attorney analyzing the case publicly noted that this reticence, the unwillingness to answer a basic factual question about method of entry, suggested something out of the ordinary, because if it were standard forced entry, there would be no particular reason to withhold that information from the public. It does not compromise an investigation to confirm that a door was kicked in. If there was no confirmed forced entry, if no door was broken, no window was compromised, no lock was picked, then someone opened that door. Either it was unlocked and the perpetrator simply pushed it, or someone inside opened it, or Nancy herself opened it, possibly because she heard knocking, possibly because she did not see clearly who was there in the dark, possibly because her hearing aids were on the nightstand and she could not hear or see enough through the door to know what she was opening it to. Journalist Ashley Banfield, through confirmed sources close to the investigation, reported that blood was found inside the front entrance of the home, not just on the porch outside. The blood pattern began inside, continued across the threshold, and led down the walkway. That pattern is consistent with blood originating at the doorway itself, at the moment of the door being opened, and continuing as Nancy was moved outward. It is not consistent with blood originating inside the home and then appearing at the threshold as an afterthought. Blood at the threshold, from both sides of the door, with no confirmed forced entry. The physical evidence of something that happened at the moment of contact, at the boundary between inside and outside, in those first seconds of an encounter that the ransom theory requires us to believe was a controlled professional extraction. The third piece of evidence, the blood at the front door. Law enforcement confirmed that bloodstains were found at or near the entrance to Nancy Guthrie's home. Forensic testing determined the blood belonged to Nancy. Drops on the porch, at and near the entry point. Her blood outside her front door, confirmed by DNA. John Miller, the same analyst who identified the one-way ransom communication problem, made the assessment that has stayed with every careful observer of this case since the moment he said it. He said, whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. He was not describing the investigation going wrong. He was describing what happened at that door. Blood at the point of entry is the forensic signature of a situation that escalated at the moment of contact in a way that was not anticipated by whoever was there. Think about the operational implications. If your objective is a ransom kidnapping, if you are there to take a specific person and hold them until a financial demand is met, then your most fundamental requirement is keeping that person alive and physically manageable. A confrontation at the front door that produces bloodshed before she has even been moved creates visible evidence, alerts neighbors, generates exactly the kind of physical trace that forensic investigators spend weeks processing. Every competent planner of a ransom kidnapping designs the extraction to avoid this. Speed, control, minimum physical contact, no blood at the scene. And yet blood at the front door before she was even moved anywhere. Former FBI and CIA officer Tracy Walder was direct about what this means for the targeting of this home specifically. She said on the record, "It's just too targeted. This is not a house you just come upon and decide to rob. It's just not that." Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers, in an exclusive statement to Parade magazine, added, "I have never thought this was a robbery gone wrong." He explained that professional burglars do not enter homes at 2 in the morning when the resident is almost certainly inside, because having a person present transforms a property crime into a violent crime, dramatically increasing both risk and legal consequences. There was also no confirmed report of anything being taken from Nancy's home. No missing valuables, no electronics, no jewelry. A burglary that takes nothing is not a burglary. It is something else. Former FBI agent Grusing offered a scenario that the physical evidence supports. He asked publicly whether the suspect was pressing the doorbell or knocking, trying to get Nancy to open the door while covering the camera so she would not see a masked face. He noted that if someone came to her door in the middle of the night and she opened it, possibly groggy, possibly confused, in the partial darkness, not fully able to see who was there, the situation could have escalated violently at that moment, at the moment of contact, before anything else could happen. The blood tells us that something went wrong at the threshold, not inside the home, not in the bedroom, at the door, before she was moved, before the plan, whatever the plan actually was, could proceed as intended. The fourth piece of evidence, 41 minutes. The confirmed timeline from investigators. The doorbell camera was disconnected at 1:47 a.m. A motion sensor on a separate camera detected a person at 2:12 a.m., though no footage was available because Nancy did not have an active recording subscription. Her pacemaker disconnected from her phone at 2:28 a.m. From camera disconnect to pacemaker disconnect, 41 minutes. Jim Clemente is a former FBI supervisory special agent and behavioral profiler who spent his career specializing in abductions and violent crimes. When he analyzed this case, he identified the 41-minute window as one of the most analytically significant pieces of evidence available. He said directly, "The suspect spent approximately 40 minutes in the home and crime scene, and that is a very long time for a simple targeted kidnapping." He is correct, and the reason he is correct is worth stating precisely. If your objective is a ransom kidnapping, if you are there specifically to take an elderly woman and transport her to a holding location, then speed is your most fundamental operational requirement. Every additional minute you spend at the primary location compounds your exposure. Neighbors could look out a window, a car could drive past and record your vehicle. A surveillance system you did not know about could be capturing footage. Your physical presence, breath, skin cells, biological trace, is accumulating with every passing minute. Professional abductors understand this. The FBI's own kidnapping response literature is consistent. A clean extraction is fast. Minutes at the scene, not 40. 40 minutes is not a kidnapping timeline. The physical act of moving one person from a bedroom to a waiting vehicle does not require 40 minutes under any circumstances. Even with a resistant or physically limited victim, even in the dark, even in a house you needed to navigate, the extraction itself should take a fraction of that time. 40 minutes is, however, a timeline for something else. 40 minutes is the time required to move through every room in a home, to open files and review their contents, to examine multiple drawers and multiple pieces of furniture, to access a computer or tablet, to look through paperwork and personal documents. to search deliberately, with focus, for something specific. Something that required looking rather than grabbing. Something that was not immediately visible. Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers offered the interpretive framework for this that carries the most investigative weight. He told Parade that he believes it is highly likely that someone with prior knowledge of Nancy's home, her schedule, her security systems, her daily routines, her physical layout, was involved. Someone who knew where things were. Someone who had a reason to be looking for something specific inside that house. Someone who came with a purpose that extended beyond simply removing an elderly woman for financial gain. Former FBI agent Guthrie added his own reading. The suspect may have had a personal grievance. He may have been there because of something personal, a conflict, a history, a relationship, and the original plan may not have become what it ended up being. Nancy may have recognized him at the door. That recognition, that moment of identification, may have been what caused the situation to escalate before it could be controlled, which would explain both the blood at the entry point and the unplanned nature of what followed for the next 40 minutes. The fifth piece of evidence, the medication window. Nancy Guthrie required daily medication for a serious heart condition. Sheriff Nanos made this the center of his public communications from the first press conference. He was not vague. He said clearly, repeatedly, and with urgency, without her medication, her life could be at risk within 24 hours. He contacted local pharmacies. He made public appeals directly to whoever might be holding Nancy, asking them to ensure she received her medicine. He treated the medication window as the most immediate life-threatening variable in the entire case. She was taken in the early hours of February 1st. If she was alive and in someone's custody, she needed her medication by February 2nd at the very latest, and every day after that for the duration of any captivity. Now examine the ransom notes against this baseline. Did either note acknowledge her medical condition? No. Did either offer any assurance that she was receiving her medication? No. Did any communication through any channel suggest that whoever claimed to hold Nancy Guthrie had any awareness of or concern for her cardiac medication needs? No. The people who allegedly kidnapped an elderly woman for a $6 million ransom, who, according to Levin, included insider details like the Apple Watch and the floodlight, those same people apparently had no plan for keeping their alleged victim alive past day one. The math does not work. It has never worked. Former Nassau County Police Lieutenant Michael Gould, founder of the NYPD's K-9 unit and a professional with deep experience in missing persons investigations, looked at that math and reached a conclusion that should have commanded far more public attention than it received. His assessment, given exclusively to the Mirror US, based on Nancy's medical dependency, the physical evidence of trauma at the scene, and the complete absence of any proof of life or care from those claiming to hold her, she most likely died within the first 72 hours of her disappearance. 72 hours from the early morning of February 1st is February 4th, 5 days before the ransom deadline of February 9th. If Gould is right, and every clinical logic point and every piece of expert analysis supports him, then February 9th was not a countdown to a transaction. It was a date chosen by someone who knew or strongly suspected that Nancy Guthrie would not survive to see it. A deadline set to create the appearance of an ongoing kidnapping, to absorb law enforcement resources into a hostage rescue scenario that had no living hostage, to keep the media focused on a transaction that would never happen, and to delay the moment when investigators would stop asking, "Where is she?" and start asking what actually happened. When February 9th arrived and the silence continued, it was not the silence of a kidnapper who panicked. It was the silence of someone who had no more use for the kidnapping story. 5 pieces of evidence. Ransom notes sent to media, not to the family with the money. No proof of life across 60 days of an alleged captivity. Blood at the front door before she was even moved. 41 minutes in a house when a professional kidnapping extraction would have taken minutes. A medication window that likely closed 5 days before the ransom deadline. This does not mean we know with certainty what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The investigation is ongoing. The DNA recovered from inside her home is still being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. Genetic genealogy analysis is being applied to the evidence. The pacemaker signal technology continues to scan the terrain around Tucson. No arrest has been made. No one has been charged. Let us also address the one piece of evidence that appears most directly to support the kidnapping theory, and examine it honestly. Because intellectual integrity requires engaging with the strongest version of the counterargument, not dismissing it. Savannah Guthrie said in her Today Show interview that she believes the 2 ransom notes the family received and responded to were real. She said she tends to believe those notes came from whoever took her mother. Those notes contained the Apple Watch detail and the reference to damage inside the home during the abduction, information that, as multiple experts noted, would only be available to someone present at the scene. That is a meaningful piece of evidence. It cannot be dismissed. A daughter who was in direct communication with FBI investigators and who has professional experience evaluating information believes those 2 notes were authentic. But note the careful qualifier. Savannah said she tends to believe they are real. Not that investigators confirmed they are real. Not that the FBI authenticated them. Not that any law enforcement statement verified the connection between the note writers and the masked figure on the doorbell footage. She said, "I tend to believe, based on her own assessment and her knowledge of what information the notes contained." And Grusing's analysis directly addressed this. The person or persons who sent those emails and the person who appeared on the doorbell camera footage did not appear to be the same operational entity. One possibility that fits both the insider detail and the absence of any contact mechanism is that someone with knowledge of what happened that night, but who was not the masked figure on the porch, sent those notes. Someone who knew what happened, who knew about the Apple Watch, who knew about the damage inside the home, and who sent those notes not to initiate a negotiation, but to create a specific public story about what kind of crime had occurred. That is not a certainty. It is one interpretation of the evidence that is consistent with everything else in the documented record. The investigation is ongoing. The truth of the ransom notes, who wrote them, what their relationship was to what happened at the door, whether they represent a genuine if failed ransom operation or something else entirely, is presumably part of what investigators are still working to establish. What the evidence establishes with more confidence is the conclusion about what the 5 pieces of evidence collectively show: that the kidnapping narrative does not fit the physical record, the behavioral record, or the professional assessment of the most experienced analysts who have examined this case on the record. What it means is this: multiple credentialed experts, including a former FBI supervisory special agent and behavioral profiler, a former deputy commissioner of the NYPD, a former FBI special agent who spent 25 years on exactly these kinds of cases, a former law enforcement lieutenant and K-9 unit founder, a cybersecurity expert and former law enforcement professional, and the FBI's own lead agent in this investigation, all of them, through their public statements, from their professional experience, using their professional language, have collectively assembled a picture that does not match the kidnapping narrative that has structured 60 days of coverage. The blood tells us something went wrong at the threshold. The 40 minutes tells us whatever happened next was not a clean professional extraction. The medication window tells us the ransom deadline was set after the viable window for Nancy's survival had likely closed. The notes going to media rather than to the family tells us the demand was designed to be public rather than functional. The absence of any proof of life across the entire duration tells us that whoever sent those notes either could not or did not need to produce one. Nancy Guthrie was a woman of faith who went to dinner with her family on a January Saturday evening and never made it to church the next morning. She had a home she had lived in for 50 years. She had a front porch where something happened that the evidence has been quietly describing for 60 days. She deserves the truth, not the cover story that was built on top of it. If you have any information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. The family reward remains active and is payable anonymously. Every tip is reviewed. If this investigation reached you, if it made the evidence make sense in a way that changes how you understand this case, subscribe to Unclosed Files. Hit the notification bell. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. New documentary investigations every single week. This documentary was produced for informational and educational purposes only, based entirely on publicly available sources, including official law enforcement statements and verified commentary from named credentialed sources, including CNN, Fox News Digital, News Nation, ABC News, The Mirror US, Parade Magazine, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. No individual has been named or implied as the person responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The investigation is ongoing. All analysis reflects the documented evidence and the on-the-record assessments of named professionals. This channel has no affiliation with the Guthrie family, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, or any law enforcement agency. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family deserves answers, and the truth of what happened at that front door deserves to be followed wherever the evidence leads. There is also a broader investigative reality that deserves direct statement. The investigation that is responsible for following this evidence to its conclusion has been operating under serious institutional strain for the entirety of this case. A unanimous no-confidence vote from the union, representing more than 300 deputies. A former U.S. Surgeon General and former Pima County Sheriff calling the crime scene corrupted on national television. A deputy arrested on kidnapping charges while this investigation was active. A board of supervisors vote to compel the current sheriff to answer questions under oath. That institutional context matters to the question of whether every available evidence trail has been followed with equal rigor. If the kidnapping frame absorbed investigative resources toward a transaction that was never going to happen, while other evidence trails, the blood pattern, the 41-minute window, the missing forced entry confirmation, the DNA profile in the home, receive secondary priority, then the institutional crisis compounds the evidentiary one. A case that depends entirely on physical evidence, processed by an institution whose own integrity has been publicly questioned at the highest levels, by its own former leaders, by its own current deputies, is a case at risk of losing the threads that still exist to be followed. The DNA from inside Nancy's home is still being processed. The genealogy analysis is still building toward a name. The pacemaker technology is still scanning. The investigation, despite everything, is still active. What this evidence analysis has attempted to do is state plainly what the evidence itself has been showing for 60 days in the language of the professionals who have examined it on the record, without the frame of the kidnapping narrative that has obscured it. 5 pieces of evidence. 1 conclusion. The kidnapping story does not fit what happened at that door. Whatever the truth is, wherever the DNA leads, whatever name the genealogy analysis produces, whatever the paper bag that left Annie's house contained, the truth of this case will not look like the story that was built in those first days to explain it. The evidence has been telling a different story all along. It is time to follow that story to wherever it leads. Nancy Guthrie was a woman of faith who removed her hearing aids at night and slept in complete silence in a house she had called home for 50 years. She went to dinner with her family on a Saturday evening. She never made it to church the next morning. Whatever happened in those 41 minutes, whatever the blood at the threshold tells investigators about how the night began, she deserved better than a cover story. She deserves the investigation that follows the evidence wherever it actually leads.